cloth. You can't see it though, can you? Okay, good. It won't distract you then, just me. All right, Hebrews. The reviews have to be briefer and briefer every class period, Jane. So don't bog me down. I cannot afford a stumbling block from a place I'm not expecting, right? And that would definitely be a stumbling block I'm not expecting. So that first section, the introductory section of the letter, the finality of Christianity, he starts strong with an assertion that God has communicated with man, he's revealed himself in all these different methods, but now in these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. That means a lot when you say these are the last days and this is the ultimate final revelation. His Son, Jesus Christ, is better than angels. Jesus is a son, whereas the angels are merely servants, ministers, right? He quotes all these Old Testament passages where we come to the conclusion that Jesus, the Son, is actually Yahweh. He is God. He is Yahweh. The Lord passages are applied to him. So right out of the gate, he's cautioning his audience. We must pay the most careful attention so that we do not drift away. If a message spoken through angels was very grave and violations were punished very severely, what conclusion can you reach? How shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? In chapter 2, he goes on to introduce the concept of Jesus as a high priest. And this Jesus, who is the Son, he's had all these great things said about him, but he was for a little while made lower than the angels, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Part of his greatness, part of his superiority, part of his exaltation is that he humbled himself, became like his brethren, became human, and as a human, he suffered terrible things. He was tempted, but he didn't sin, and he was raised after his death. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is Satan, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. So that's the first concept that he tackles. Then he moves into a rest, the true home of the people of God, in chapter 3. And here there is a subtle comparison to Moses. It's a briefer comparison, but Jesus, the Son, is greater than Moses. Moses was a faithful servant. He was a great man in the history of the Jewish people. But Jesus was a son. Moses was a servant. Jesus is the maker of the house, and Moses was a servant in the house. We have another admonition, and it's based on this psalm, Psalm 95. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested and tried me, though for 40 years they saw what I did. So that is that passage in Psalm 95 is the basis for this whole argument in chapter 3 and 4. Right? That's his launching pad. That message was spoken to the generation in the wilderness. They were repeatedly warned, Moses is constantly wrangling with them. You know, they're speaking to the rock, they're smacking the rock. He's just constantly frustrated with their lack of faith and their rebellion. This psalm was written in David's time, and it refers back to that generation, and it uses that as a warning to the people in his day. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And now this Hebrew writer is taking that same psalm and applying it. And he makes an argument, a logical argument, that if David in his time is still talking about not hardening your hearts and entering into God's rest, then doesn't that mean that the rest that Moses failed to give, that Joshua did give, which is lead them into the land of Canaan, that isn't the ultimate rest? That's his logical argument, okay? So I declared on oath, or I swore in my wrath, that they shall never enter my rest. These faithless, rebellious, disobedient Jews, Hebrews. So in chapter 4, verse 1, verse 6, verse 9, 3 times he emphasizes, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still remains, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God, right? So the warning is twofold. One, if people who had all those advantages, who saw God mightily acting right before their eyes, if those people fell away from the living God, if they rebelled, if they were obedient because of their hearts of disbelief, then that could happen to anybody. It could happen to anybody. It could happen to you, right? And so we need to be careful, and we need to cling and hold on dearly to the message. He ends that section in chapter 4 with a return to one of his favorite topics, which is Jesus the Son as high priest. And it's very encouraging, it's very positive, it is not intimidating or threatening or foreboding. Listen to the tone here in chapter 4, verse 14. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may have received mercy and may find grace to help in time of need. So we go into the priesthood. He spends a lot of time talking about the priesthood and how Jesus is superior. He's marvelous. He's awesome as a priest. And there's all these comparisons made. So the passage that we just read, qualifications for a priesthood, this is just basic fundamental stuff, that a priesthood is a mediator, a go-between who represents God to the people and also mediates from the people to God, offering gifts, offering sacrifices. And another thing about priests is you don't take that role upon yourself. You have to be granted or assigned that role. And so here he introduces for the first time an important passage that he will revisit repeatedly, and it is a passage in Psalm 110. I want to go back and read that psalm. He's used that psalm already once in the very beginning when he is documenting the elevation, the superiority of the Son. But let's go back and read that psalm. It's not a long psalm, it's 7 verses. Psalm 110. The Lord, that's Yahweh, Yahweh says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies a footstool for thy feet. Yahweh will stretch forth thy strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of thine enemies. Thy people will volunteer freely in the day of thy power. In holy array from the womb of the dawn, Thy youth are to thee as the dew. And then verse 4, the passage that the author now quotes. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. Thou art a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at thy right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. He will judge among the nations. He will fill them with corpses. He will shatter the chief men over a broad country. He will drink from the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he will lift up his head. So, overall, it is a passage about the Lord, Yahweh, giving kingship and a priesthood, right, to this person. And this person will rule. He will rule forever. That's the tone, the topic of the psalm. But two of those passages are quoted. The first one, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand. That's repeatedly quoted even in the Gospels and in the New Testament. And now the Hebrew writer uses the second quote from verse 4 as a linchpin to his part of his argument about the priesthood. So that is Jesus' calling as a priest from Scripture. Psalm 110, verse 4. Okay? We have another series of admonitions and warnings. He talks to them about wanting to press on and talk about this Melchizedek, but they are spiritually immature. They're only fit for milk. They're not ready for meat. It's kind of a shame, by this point you ought to be teaching other people, but we're having to revisit basic doctrines. Yeah? And then he goes on and talks about Melchizedek anyway. I think that's pretty cool. There's also this very strong language about once you've tasted, once you've experienced, once you've had fellowship, it is impossible to be brought again to repentance since you're crucifying again the Son of God. Encouragement to persevere. Let's pick up in chapter 6, verse 9. You, beloved, were convinced of better things concerning you and things that accompany salvation, though we are speaking in this way. I think you've had this experience as parents, right? Where you lay into your child. You have a very stern talking about some subject. Maybe you've watched them do something. You've reported that they've done something, and it warrants very strong talk. You deliver that strong talk, and then how do you feel? Did it need to happen? Do you regret having said those things? Do you I want to take it back? No, but you love them, and you want to reinforce the bond, and you want to assure them that you still love them and that they're still your child and that nothing has changed, even though I've just ripped into you. Okay, right? And I kind of think that's what this is he's had to say some very strong things because they are warranted. There is reason for concern based on what he knows about them, and he wants them to understand completely, here's the situation, here are the consequences. And after he says that, he wants to put his arms around them and say, I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful about you. I don't think this right now specifically applies to you, right? But take it seriously. Verse 13 is where we left off last time, okay? So, for when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply you. And thus, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. For men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is an end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, in order that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, that's the second one, right? What would be the first one in the context of the passage here? By using an oath, right? Okay, so I guess maybe in order of occurrence, you start with the premise that God can't lie. But God was not content to leave it at that, and so he added an oath. And if you're going to swear, if you're the creator of the universe, and you're going to add some oomph to your statement, and you're going to swear, whose name are you going to swear by? Your own name. There's no higher name. So he swears by, he adds an oath. So that's the second thing. So that now we have two unchangeable things. Impossible for God to lie, and this oath that he's referred to. The whole point is that we may have strong encouragement, we who have fled for refuge and lain hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. Yes? Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you think the promise is the first thing, and the oath is the second thing, and that the reason those are two immutable things is God can't lie? Okay. I'd give some more thought to that before I make a decision on whether I'm convinced. Clearly, the author is, the point is to emphasize the assurance that we should have. And he starts with the assurance that Abraham had. Abraham had assurance. He believed. He'll revisit that in the famous chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, the Hall of Fame of Faith. And he makes the point that many of these people went for long periods of time still believing, even though they didn't see concrete evidence, or at least all of the concrete evidence. They were still waiting, right? So first Abraham, then he also mentions who else? Verse 17, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise. Okay, so who would be an heir? Who was the first heir of the promise? Isaac, okay? And then Jacob, and then the 12, right? And then the children of Israel. So from that point on, he wants the heirs of the promise to believe in it and be assured of it. And then all the way down to the day of the people that the author is writing to, okay? So there's just an interjection here of encouragement based on the steadfastness, the sureness of God's promise. And he goes back into the history and says the promises to Abraham, Abraham believed, Abraham was assured, and it's based on a promise, an oath is added, and by the way, it's impossible for God to lie. So however you count those, this is a rock-solid thing to believe in, right? This hope, in fact, is described as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, And where is it anchored? We have some boaters here. We have a fisherman. We have fisherman. Who else? Who else likes to fish? Okay. Ooh, several. Okay. You ever had an anchor fail you? Yeah. So it's not good enough to just have an anchor. What matters is the anchor and where is it anchored to. And so this anchor is enters within the veil. We're talking about the heavenly place, the Holy of Holies, where Jesus has entered as a front runner for us, having become a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And so here he returns again to this topic that he wants to talk about. He's delayed talking about it because he needed to remind them that they need to press on to maturity. They're languishing in this immature state. And so after some scolding and some prodding and some reassuring, he presses on now to Melchizedek. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about? Chapter 6 and backward. Jane, anything? No. Chris? No, I mean, it's perfect. You're teeing up. You're saying, Steve, please, can we talk about Melchizedek in chapter 7? Okay. So in the pantheon of Hebrew characters, so I think they were called Hebrews, then they're called Israelites, then they're called Jews. Depending on what time of history, those are the prominent names referred to them, okay? But as you look back, obviously Adam was an important character in human history, but he wasn't a Jew. He wasn't a Hebrew. He was the father of all peoples, right? You got Noah, really important guy. Basically started over again with him and his family. Not a Hebrew, not an Israelite, not a Jew. Abraham would be the start of that, but even he predates Israel. Even he dates the Hebrews. You have other people coming off from him, right? So in the whole pantheon of Hebrew people, who are the Mount Rushmore? Abraham, Moses, David, those are almost indisputable. You might start throwing in maybe an Elijah. You could argue about if there's a second tier, okay? But notice up through chapter 6, what has he already addressed? The pantheon. So he's already talked about Moses. As great as Moses was, he didn't lead the people into the land of Canaan. And Moses is a servant in the house. Jesus is a son over the house. Jesus is greater than Moses insofar as the maker of the house is greater than the servant of the house, or the house itself. That was a different metaphor that he used. And now we're going to start getting into Abraham. He's gotten in the ballpark here with this end of chapter 6 encouragement by referencing Abraham and the promise that was made to him. In chapter 7 with Melchizedek, that bumps right up next to Abraham, because Melchizedek and Abraham were peers. They were contemporaries. Okay? Now, Melchizedek is not in the pantheon. He's just not. There's only a couple verses in the whole Bible talked about him in its original source material, and then there's this reference in Psalm 110. That's it. The Hebrew writer uses this reference in 110 as the foundation for this really big argument. Okay? And part of the argument is that there's only a little bit said about him. That is used as a literary device to make the whole point, to make the whole argument. Okay, so we'll get into that. So let's go. Let's start with verses 1 through 3, because we're going to go now into the order of Melchizedek. Chapter 7 in our Bibles is this next very separate, distinct point. It's all part of the larger context of superiority, subpoint of the high priesthood of Jesus Christ, but it is a standalone argument here in chapter 7. So first we have the introduction of the person, the priest-king Melchizedek, in verses 1 through 3. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. That is, Melchizedek blessed Abraham. To whom also Abraham apportioned a 10th part of all the spoils. This Melchizedek was first of all, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he abides a priest perpetually. There you go. That's the foundation of this argument about Melchizedek. It's about as brief as the historical record of Melchizedek. Let's go back and look at that. It's in Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter 14. So this is a part of the narrative that is focused on the life of Abraham. It's in chapter 12 that he's called. He's called out of Ur the Chaldees, and then he goes to Haran. So it isn't an old story yet in chapter 14. Still a relatively new story. And this main character, Abraham, this is a part of the story where the narrator kind of rises up a little bit, and he kind of backs up and looks at what's going on in the area where Abraham lived, and that the geopolitical goings-ons impacts Abraham and his family, and so it becomes part of the story, right? So there's, I can't remember if it's 5 kings, 6 kings against 4 kings or whatever, but there's these group of kings, this alliance and another alliance, and they one of them attacks the other, and caught in the crosshairs is Lot and Lot's family. And so Abraham hears about it, and it seems without much deliberation at all, this man of action gathers up his, and we know from other accounts that he had several hundred, I don't remember exactly how many or where it references that, but he had several hundred servants. So he says, let's go, let's get on our camels, donkeys, whatever, and took off to rescue Lot. That was the point. Well, he did more than rescue Lot. He whooped the whole alliance and their army of the kings that attacked and took Lot as a hostage. So Abram is coming back, and he's got Lot and his family, and he's got the spoils of war too, because he whooped this alliance. He leaves the battlefield victor. They fled, leaving all this good stuff. And Abram's coming back, and here, boom, in verse 17, let's pick up in verse 17. Well, let's first go to 16. He brought back all the goods, brought back his relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the people, right? Verse 17, then after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him, Abram, at the valley of Sheba. And it's at that point in the story that this seemingly random, I don't think it was random, but it just appears out of the left field, that this person shows up. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now that's a fascinating thing that begs a comparison to what? The Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, okay? No biblical commentary. It's just left hanging tantalizingly, like what? And no editorial, no comment. Even the Hebrew writer doesn't touch it. Okay. So he brings out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. And he, Melchizedek, blessed him, Abram, and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. That's God Most High, not Abram, right? God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. That's it. That's what we're told Melchizedek said to Abram. And then Abram turned around and gave him a tenth of all. Tenth of all what? The spoils that he just collected from this battle. And then, Melchizedek apparently just kind of moves on and just leaves the scene. And now we pick up again with Sodom, remember, or the king of Sodom, because that's who was about to meet him when this interruption of Melchizedek happens. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give the people to me and take the goods for yourself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. Now that's interesting. We didn't get that in real time, the interaction between Melchizedek and Abram. But apparently, from Abram's own testimony, during this little interaction with Melchizedek, in response to what Melchizedek said to Abram, this blessing that he received, Abram swore, I'm not going to keep any of the stuff. So he gives a tenth of it to Melchizedek, and the rest of it, when the king of Sodom says, hey, can I have my people back? You can keep all the stuff. Now, why would the king of Sodom make that offer? Think about it. Why would the king of Sodom not say, hey, give me all my stuff back? Because Abram just whooped an alliance of 4, 5, 6 kings, and you don't want to push your luck, right? It's kind of like being with 2 losses, sitting at number 6 and saying, hey, we should be in the playoffs, okay? No, it's not going to happen, okay? You're pushing your luck. So he just says, look, if you just give me my people back, you can keep all the stuff. And Abraham reveals that he had just made an oath of his own, that I will not keep any of this stuff. Because who is it that is going to make Abram great? God Most High. God has told him, I'm going to make you great. And so he does not want that diluted in anyone's minds, that Abram's going out there, pillaging and going out and rampaging and accumulating stuff and taking it. So I will not I will not take anything except what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Abner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their share. That's it. That's the story in its original context. Okay? Now we go back to Hebrews chapter 7. And he succinctly repeats what we know about Melchizedek. He adds just a little bit, right? He talks about the name and where he's from, and he gives some meaning to that, okay? So Melchizedek, what part of Melchizedek does he get righteousness from? Anybody know? It's the Zedek part. If you translate that, it means righteousness in Hebrew. Okay? Now, no big deal is made about that in Genesis chapter 14. He's just introduced as Melchizedek. But the Hebrews would know, if you look at the letters and you look at the words that make up his name, that Zedek is Hebrew for righteousness. So the Hebrew writer says, aha, look at that. This guy, Melchizedek, is king of righteousness. Now also, where does the text tell us he's from? Salem, or in Hebrew, Shalom. Right? And we're more familiar with that point in Scripture, right? Because Salem becomes, after David attacks, gets the Jebusites out, it becomes Jerusalem, right? And David, he's not really the king of peace. Solomon later is the king of peace, right? But so Salem meaning peace. So that's where he's from. His name means righteousness. He's really king of Salem. That's peace. So you see what the author's doing? He's taking the name and where he's from, and he's loading it up with meaning. He's king of righteousness, and he's king of peace. And now here's the bigger leap. This person, Melchizedek, appears suddenly on the scene, and he disappears just as quickly. We know his name. We know he's the king of Salem. We know he is a priest of the God Most High. What else do we know about him? Nothing else. What do we know about his father? What about his mother? What about his grandfather? What about any part of his genealogy? Okay, now here's the question. Does that mean, I'm asking you literally, so I believe that Melchizedek is a human being. Okay? This human being named Melchizedek, did he have a father in real life? I believe he did. Did he have a mother? I believe he did. He was born in the normal, natural way. He had a grandfather. He had a great-grandfather. He has a genealogy. Okay? And I think if you would press the Hebrew author about that and say, no, wait a minute, are you saying that Melchizedek, man, back in Abraham's day, he didn't have a father and mother? No, of course he did. But he's not mentioned in the Scripture. And so he is taking what is said and what is not said, and he's loading both of those things up with meaning, and he is creating a type. A type antitype. It is a literary device. The only other option available to us is what? And this is a possibility. I just don't think it's the right one. That he is this, supernaturally created being, that God just poof and makes this Melchizedek, and he trots onto the scene and has this little episode with Abram, and that's really his purpose for existing. And I suppose he would also have to be the king of Salem, but again, he would have been this magical, mythical figure who shows up in flesh and blood one day and says, hey, I'm king. Maybe he wins a battle. I don't mean, we're making all this stuff up, right? But that's basically our two choices. Either he's a regular, normal human being who has a father and mother. He was born in a year. He grew up. He lived his life. He was king of Salem. He got old. He died like a normal human. That's one option. Or he was some really, Enoch type guy, who was created. Yeah? What I believe is that the first one, regular person, real person, important person. He was a priest of the God Most High. He was king of Salem. His name was Melchizedek. Nothing else is said about him. He's kind of one of those mysterious characters. And the author of Hebrews uses that. He uses this mysterious character who just comes on the scene without any introduction, leaves the scene as fast as he came, nothing said about his background, and he uses that to create a type. Okay? So we got the name, King of Righteousness. He was King of Salem, which means peace. He was priest of the Most High God. And then the rest of it, he's making an argument from what's not said. So he is without father. From the text, at least as far as the text goes, he's without father, he's without mother, he's without genealogy. He has neither beginning of days nor end of life. And so in that sense, he's made like the Son of God. The character is made like the Son of God. And in that sense, he's a priest perpetually. Do we ever read about him not serving as priest? Do we ever read about his priesthood ending? No. So that's the author's point. He's taking what is said and what is not said, and he's launching into this type, anti-type literary device. Yes, sir. Yep. Okay. Right. Okay, fair point. Yeah, so if there hadn't been this reference to Melchizedek in Psalm 110, Melchizedek would be just another guy. Jethro, Job, others who served as a priest. There's lots of kings, Chedorlaomer and all these other guys. He might have been a good guy. He might have been a faithful, righteous servant of God. He might have even been of some note and repute in his day. But in terms of the whole sweep of history, he'd be just a footnote. But Psalm 110, long before the Hebrew writer, what is God doing when he puts Psalm 110 in there? And he says, let me go back and read it right out of it. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. Thou art a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. He's setting it up. It's just mentioned there. That's it. It's not revisited again until the Hebrew writer comes along. Now maybe there's other, I don't know Jewish scholarship. I don't know, the rabbis may have talked about Melchizedek for hundreds of years. But in terms of the inspired record, a few verses in Genesis, no more mention of him throughout the history. Psalm 110, I have sworn I will not change my mind. Thou art a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And then it's just put it back in the envelope, put back in the safe, locked up for hundreds more years, another 1,000 years. Thank you. But what that Psalm 110 does is it means that the Hebrew writer is not just going back and making a type, anti-type out of whole cloth. God has set this up. with that Psalm 110. Okay? It is a preview of an intentional type-antitype connection. Okay, so that's the big deal, Chris. That's the big deal, is an intentionally small amount of information, tantalizing little nuggets, just enough to be interested. The name, where he's from, he's a high priest. You got this interaction, this bizarre interaction with Abram. But it's perfect. It's perfect. It's just enough. And what's not said, you get this swearing, I'm not going to change my mind, you're a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Whoop, that's it. That's all you get. And now it's just ripe for the Hebrew writer to make this whole type-antitype argument, and then launching from that a convincing, compelling case for why Jesus' high priesthood is superior to the priesthood of Aaron. That's it. That's all of it. It's wonderful. That's all there is. Okay? There's nothing more to it than that. Hands? Questions? Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so the rest of the chapter now, from 4 all the way to the end of the chapter, is making these arguments based on the interaction, the little bit of information, and the information that's not there. Okay, a whole I don't want to say mythology, because that's not the right idea, but just a whole character is built out of what little is said, but equally as important, what is not said. And so he becomes this person who is without beginning of days and no end of life. He's a priesthood forever. He's perpetually a priest. Of course, we're going to run out of time today. We'll pick up here. But the interaction is crucial, because two things happen with Abram. This great man, this father of faith, this beginning of the people of Israel, is Melchizedek blesses him, and Abram gives him a tenth. Huge ramifications for that. You can just go on and on about why that's important, okay? Because who was figuratively, not literally, he even uses a coin of phrase here, as it were, Levi was in Abram's loins at the time that they interacted. Not literally, okay? But that's a common expression in Old Testament about, the loins and people that are going to come from later, okay? Well, if the president comes, does the president come and give me a gift? No, I give him. He's the greater personage. I should be deferring to him, right? So if Abram is giving a tithe to Melchizedek, that suggests the inferiority of the Levitical, the Aaronic priesthood, because Abram gave a tithe. Melchizedek is blessing Abram, right? Then, as great as Abram was, what does that say about Melchizedek? Puts him above Abram. And Jesus is a high priest by the order of Melchizedek. Okay? Then from there, he goes to the whole point about, wait a minute, if he swore in Psalm 110 that there would be a new priest according to the order of Melchizedek, what does that mean? What does that mean he had in mind? If he had a new priesthood in mind, not from the tribe of Levi, not from the line of Aaron, then what else do you have to have? A new law. Because the law said it's got to be Levi, it's got to be from Aaron. All that's built into the law. So if there's going to be a new priesthood, it's not just the priesthood, it's the law, right? It's the whole covenant is changing. All right, we'll pick up there next time. Thank you.